The first thing Marat Kovarov noticed when he came back to himself was that someone was humming. It was a woman's voice, low and patient, threading through the dark. Something old, a work song maybe, the kind that doesn't need words because the body already knows the shape of it. He lay still and listened. The hum moved around him, pausing, resuming, the way a person hums when they are thinking about something else entirely. When he finally opened his eyes, the ceiling above him was the gray composite of a station bulkhead. Rust-colored smears traced the ventilation seams. The air tasted of recycled oxygen and something faintly biological. A greenhouse smell, green and damp, and the humming was coming from a woman crouched 6 meters away, doing something careful with a bundle of optical cabling. "You were dead," she said without looking up. "Technically, your suit sealed the wound before you could finish losing enough blood to make it permanent." "That's a generous reading," Marat said. His voice came out, scraped and dry. "It's the accurate one." She glanced at him then. Dark eyes, a face that was young but not soft, the kind of calm that gets built over years of not panicking in bad situations. "I'm Vera. I grew up on this station. I know every room it has, including this one which the Veth have not found yet." She paused. "It helps to know a place so well that you can find it in the dark." Marat sat up carefully. The left side of his chest ached with a deep radiating throb, and when he pressed his fingers to the suit's exterior, he felt the hardened sealant foam over a tear in the composite weave. 3 centimeters lower, and he would have been breathing vacuum. "The others," he said. Vera set down the cabling. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. He had left Earth orbit with 6 people. There was a problem in the deep layers of Relay Station Perova. Buried in the Lagrange cluster between the outer habitation rings and the jump corridor that serviced the Kolodny colonies, 300,000 human beings who had been living under permanent energy restriction for 83 years because of a weapon they didn't understand and couldn't reach. The Veth called it the null axis. Humans had other names for it. What mattered was what it did, a gravitational interference engine anchored somewhere in the station's lower core that suppressed heat transfer efficiency across an entire stellar quadrant. The physics were baroque and, to most human engineers, incomprehensible. The Kolodny colonies existed in permanent low-energy winter, not frozen, not dead, but cold in the way that makes everything harder, that grinds people down across generations, that kills slowly and without drama. The Veth had held the axis for 83 years. No one had been able to take it from them. Marat had been asked to try not because he was exceptional, but because he was stubborn, and because he had read everything ever written about Veth physics, and believed, after 8 years of reading, that he understood something about the mechanism that no one else had thought to look for. His director had told him the expedition was classified as a survey mission. He had understood that to mean, "We don't expect you to come back, but we would prefer it if you did." The team had made it through the outer hull breach on day 1. They had lost their first member on day 2, Polina, astrophysicist, 31 years old, killed by a Veth sentry drone before she had time to understand what had fired at her. By day 4, they were in the middle habitation ring, moving through corridors that the station's original human inhabitants had abandoned in pieces as the Veth tightened their grip, room by room, over decades. The walls here were covered in old human marks, spray-painted messages, scraped initials, the faded remnants of makeshift art. Someone had drawn a dog in yellow paint on a junction wall and written "Good Boy" underneath it in 3 languages. Marat had stopped to look at it longer than he should have. Yusupov had touched him on the shoulder, and they had moved on. Yusupov was gone now. Oksana was gone. Fyodor, who had been an exobiologist, and who had cried quietly on the first night in the dark because he missed his daughter, was gone. Tomoko, their systems specialist, had made it to the inner ring before the Veth found them. She had told Marat to run, and he had, and he hated himself for it, but he had been alive long enough to know that there are moments when running is the only way to honor the people who tell you to. He had run and been hit and sealed and passed out and woken up here. "How long?" he asked. 31 hours, Vera said. "You needed the time." She hesitated. "I watched your team come in from the upper service corridor. I tried to get to you sooner. There were walkers between us. Walkers. That was what the station's remaining human population. A few hundred survivors scattered across the lower habitation sections. People who had been born here and had nowhere else to go. Called the Veth's converted soldiers." Marat had read the reports. He had not been fully prepared for the reality. The Veth did not take prisoners the way humans understood the word. They were a civilization that operated on efficiency as an absolute moral value. Waste was their only genuine sin. A captured human was not an enemy to be housed and fed and exchanged. A captured human was a resource. The conversion process was not fully understood by human xenobiologists, but its results were clear. The walkers moved with the Veth's characteristic fluid economy, responded to Veth signal frequencies, defended Veth installations with the same emotionless competence as any other Veth weapon system. They looked like humans. Some of them had been human recently enough that the station survivors recognized faces. That was the part that was hardest to write about in the reports. Marat had read the paragraph twice and then set it aside. "There are more of them than there were 6 months ago," Vera said. She was braiding the cables now into a tidy harness, her fingers working from muscle memory. "The Veth have been accelerating the process. I don't know why. Something about the axis. Something is changing down there." "I know what's changing," Marat said. He reached into his suit's inner pocket and removed the data chip. Cracked along one edge but still reading, he had checked. "That's why I'm here." He explained it to her while she heated something in a field canister. A fibrous protein paste that tasted approximately of nothing but was, she told him, extremely nutritious. He ate it all. The null axis worked by generating a standing interference pattern in the quantum-level energy exchange processes that governed how heat moved through space and matter across the affected quadrant. The Veth had found a mathematical structure, a set of resonant frequencies in the geometry of the local gravitational field, that locked this interference in place. Self-sustaining, nearly permanent, enormously elegant for something designed purely to harm. "The problem," Marat said, "is that the human scientific community spent 40 years trying to counter it with brute force. More energy output, better insulation, artificial heating systems. It was like fighting a river by throwing buckets upstream." He tapped the data chip against his palm. What nobody looked at carefully was the mathematics. The axis works by exploiting a specific topological property of the local gravitational manifold. Imagine a knot. The axis is the knot. It holds its shape because the interference pattern feeds back on itself through a geometric fixed point. You can't untie it by pulling harder. You have to find the specific point in the geometry where the pattern is anchored and displace it. Vera looked at him with an expression that was half attention, half something else, a kind of watchfulness, as though she was taking his measure. "You can do that. I can do the mathematics. What I need is physical access to the axis terminus in the lower core. To take a set of readings, run the calculation, and then introduce a displacement field at the right coordinates." He paused. "On this chip is the software. In my suit's secondary pack is the emitter. The whole operation takes about 4 minutes once I'm in position. The lower core has 20 walkers, and the Veth don't leave the axis terminus unguarded. I know, your team of 6 couldn't fight through to it. I know that too." He looked at the chip. "But a team of 6 makes noise. They have to. One person, who knows the station, who can move through it like the dark knows the dark." Vera was quiet for a long moment. The hum was gone now. Then, "You want me to guide you. I want you to help me. You don't have to." "Of course I don't have to," she said it without heat. She looked at the cables in her hands and then set them down. "My mother was born on this station, my grandmother. I have a cousin who became a walker. I see him sometimes in the corridors. He still walks with the same slight lean to the left that he always did, because of an old knee injury. The Veth didn't fix the walk. They didn't notice it was there." She stopped. "Yes, I'll guide you." They moved at 0300 by station clock, which meant nothing to the Veth, but meant something to the remaining humans. The hour when the walkers' patrol cycles had the longest gap, a gap the survivors had mapped over years of careful watching. The station's lower sections were a different architecture from the habitation rings above. Older. The original construction had been industrial, heavy conduit framing, reinforced decking, ceilings high enough to run large equipment through. The Veth had overlaid it with their own additions. Smooth membrane panels that pulsed faintly with bioluminescent light, the color a deep green blue that Marat had read about, but which still unsettled him in person. The Veth built with biological materials wherever possible. Their aesthetic, if it could be called that, was organic. Everything curved, nothing wasted, every surface doing at least 2 jobs. The membranes were load-bearing and also sensory. The conduits carried both power and chemical signals. There was something almost beautiful about it if you could get past what it meant. Vera moved through it like water finding the lowest path. She did not use a light. She touched the walls with her fingertips as she went, reading the station through its surfaces, and Marat followed as closely as he could without crowding her. He was aware that he was breathing too loudly. At a junction, she stopped, raised one fist, and they waited. Marat heard the walker before he saw it, the soft, almost silent footfall, the slightly left-leaning rhythm Vera had described. It passed through the intersection 8 meters ahead of them and did not pause. After 30 seconds, Vera put her fist down and they moved again. He thought about what it would be like to be that man, whether anything remained of him inside the walker's chassis. The report said the conversion suppressed human neurological autonomy but preserved structural memory, spatial orientation, motor patterns, muscle habits. The walk with the lean to the left. A body that still knew it had a bad knee even when the mind that had suffered over it was gone. He thought about Tomoko saying run and made himself stop thinking. The terminus room was at the end of a long descending passage that smelled sharply of the Veth's chemical signaling compounds, a smell like salt and something electric, which Marat had been told indicated a high traffic area. The door was a Veth membrane seal, rippling softly. 2 walkers stood flanking it in the Veth positioning protocol, which placed them far enough apart that line of sight warning to each other was maintained but close enough to the door that they could respond to an intrusion in under 2 seconds. Vera studied the positioning for 3 full minutes from the shadow of a side passage. Marat let her. Then she leaned to his ear and described, in a voice barely above breath, what she intended to do. It involved the environmental systems. She had spent 20 years learning the station's biology, because the Veth station was biological, its air circulation as much organic as mechanical, and she knew which chemical release valves in this section responded to manual override. There were 3 of them, within reach if she climbed to the second maintenance tier. The Veth used a particular pheromone compound in the air mix of high-security areas as a calming and focus-enhancing agent for their own biology. Removing it abruptly caused, in Veth physiology, a brief period of disorientation, not long. 12 to 15 seconds, she estimated. The walkers, Marat said. The conversion process keeps the human nervous system, Vera said, but it runs Veth signal protocols over it. In disorientation events, the Veth protocols stutter.
The human substrate.
She paused. I've seen it happen twice. The walkers stop, and for a few seconds they look lost, like they don't know where they are. Another pause, careful and unreadable. I try not to think too hard about what that means. 12 seconds, Marat said. 12 seconds, maybe 15. Don't stop for anything. He didn't ask her how she was going to get down from the maintenance tier in time. He understood that she wasn't planning to. He looked at her in the green-blue bioluminescent dark. She was already checking the climb points on the wall, fingers finding the edges by feel. Her profile was calm in the way that had nothing to do with the absence of fear. Vera, he said. Don't thank me yet, she said. Go to the door. Wait. When you hear the air shift, go through. He went. The wait at the door was the worst 30 seconds of his life, which was saying something given the preceding 4 days. He could see the walkers in peripheral vision, both of them, standing in the Veth attention posture, which meant head tilted slightly upward and to the left, eyes tracking in a high-frequency oscillation. The man on the left still had the shoulder breadth of someone who had once done physical labor. He was wearing what had been a standard station technician's work coverall, now bonded with Veth membrane material at the joints and collar. His hands were at his sides with the fingers spread slightly, the Veth passive alert position. Marat thought about the dog on the wall. Good boy in 3 languages. The kind of thing a person does because they need to leave a mark that says I was here, and I was human, and I found something worth loving. The air shifted. It was subtle, a change in the smell first, the electric salt scent thinning, and then something in the pressure, a barely perceptible drop in the particular quality of stillness that the Veth's chemical compounds maintained. Then both walkers moved, not toward him, but sideways, a stumbling half-step to the left, and the man with the bad knee reached out and touched the wall, and in the split second before Marat pushed through the membrane seal, he saw the walker's face turn, unfocused, the eyes tracking nothing, and the expression on it. He went through the door. The terminus room was larger than he had expected. Veth construction ringed the walls in dense layered membranes, pulsing with light in slow rhythmic waves. At the center of the room, anchored to the floor and ceiling by thick organic tethers, was the Nulaxis terminus, a structure that looked, to Marat's eye, less like a machine than like a deep-sea organism, a flattened ovoid body trailing long filamentous extensions that reached into the walls and floors, each filament pulsing in a sequence that he recognized, with a strange lurch of intellectual wonder, as the exact resonant pattern he had derived from 8 years of mathematical analysis. He was across the room in 4 steps, and the emitter was out of his pack and oriented before his heart had time to do more than hammer twice. 4 minutes. He had told Vera 4 minutes. That was if everything worked perfectly, which it never did. He started the calibration sequence and looked at the terminus and adjusted the emitter's targeting array by hand. Because the automatic system was reading the Veth material as interference and couldn't lock. He had expected this. His hands knew the manuals. He had practiced it on a model rig 600 times over 3 months. The first walker came through the door at 40 seconds. It moved with the Veth's fluid economy, crossing the room quickly, and Marat had 1 second to register it before he decided. Not yet. He kept calibrating. The walker reached him, and its hand came down on his shoulder, and he grabbed the hand and stepped into the walker's movement. The same basic physics that human beings had been using against larger opponents for thousands of years, and used the momentum to redirect it past him into the terminus housing. The walker hit the housing and recovered with Veth speed, and Marat was back at the emitter. 2 minutes 40 seconds remaining. The second walker entered at 90 seconds, and then a third. And then the first one was upright again and crossing toward him, and Marat had blood running into his left eye from somewhere, and his chest was hurting badly enough that he was taking careful shallow breaths to keep the pain from narrowing his vision. He kept calibrating, one-handed because the other hand was occupied doing something his conscious mind was only dimly aware of, creating space, redirecting, keeping the emitter between him and the convergence. He had been a scientist for 20 years. He was not a fighter. What he was someone who had grown up in the Kolodny colonies, in the cold, where everything was harder and took longer and the failures were more expensive, and where you learned early that the only reliable variable you had any control over was whether you stopped. He did not stop. At 2 minutes 15 seconds, the calibration locked. He hit the execute command, and the emitter fired. The sound it made was not loud, a low thrumming, felt more in the teeth and the sternum than heard, and the terminus responded immediately. The filaments contracted. The pulsing rhythm stuttered, skipped a beat, tried to reestablish itself, and then, with a quality that Marat would describe later in his report as something like a long, slow exhale, the pattern broke. The walkers stopped. All 3 of them, simultaneously in the middle of whatever motion they had been making. They stood in the terminus room, with their arms in different positions and their heads at different angles, and for a moment they were simply still. Then, one by one, they raised their heads, and the high-frequency eye oscillation of the Veth protocol was gone, and what was left was something that Marat had no clinical vocabulary for. The man with the bad knees sat down on the floor. He sat down slowly, the way a person sits down when they are very tired, and he put his hands on his knees, and he looked at nothing, and something moved across his face that might have been any of 100 things. Marat stood at the emitter and watched the terminus's filaments continue to retract and thought. The Veth did not understand this. This, the bad knee, the left lean, the muscle memory that persisted through conversion, the body insisting on itself against all the protocols layered over it, this was what they had miscalculated. The axis had worked for 83 years because it was mathematically elegant and energetically self-sustaining. And the Veth had designed it for a civilization that operated on efficiency as an absolute value. They had not built in a margin for stubbornness, for a species that kept being human, even when the math said it shouldn't be possible. He became aware that his legs were not working well. He sat down too, more suddenly than he intended, and put his back against the terminus housing and waited to see if its vision was going to stay. It stayed. Vera found him 11 minutes later. She was limping badly from a fall on the descent from the maintenance tier, and she stopped in the doorway and took in the terminus room. The retracted filaments, the walker who was still sitting on the floor, the other 2 who had found a corner and were sitting back to back with their eyes closed, the emitter still warm in Marat's hand. And she said nothing for a moment. Then she crossed the room and sat down next to him. "Did it work?" she said. "Not a question exactly. The interference pattern is broken," Marat said. The self-sustaining cycle interrupted. It'll take 48 to 72 hours for the effects to fully propagate across the affected quadrant. But, he stopped, swallowed. Yes, it worked. She was quiet. He could hear Somewhere deep in the station's infrastructure, something changing, a quality of hum in the walls that he had not been aware of until it began to shift. The Veth's biological membranes were doing something, responding to the terminus's changed state. Whether that meant Veth were coming, many of them, quickly, he couldn't know yet. "We should move," he said. "Yes," she said. She didn't move immediately. She was looking at the man sitting on the floor with his hands on his knees, her cousin. The lean to the left, the bad knee, the face that was her family's face. "Will they?" "I don't know," Marat said honestly. The protocols were running on top of the human neurological structure. With the Veth signal source degraded, the protocols should lose coherence over the next several hours. "What's underneath?" He let the sentence go. "I don't know." Vera looked at her cousin for another 3 seconds. Then she stood up. As she passed him, she said something in a language Marat didn't have. A few syllables, soft and specific. He didn't ask what it meant. Some things were not for him. They came out through a maintenance shaft that Vera had identified as their best exit, and they came out into the outer habitation ring. And for a moment, they both stood still because the light was wrong. The ring's environmental systems ran on power routed through the axis interference grid. With the grid broken, the power allocation was already normalizing, which meant the ring's UV lighting array, which had been operating at 40% capacity for 83 years, was spooling up. It wasn't full spectrum yet. It was not sunrise. But it was more light than this part of the station had produced in living memory, and the quality of the air was different. And in one of the habitation compartments, a door opened and a woman looked out with the specific bewildered expression of someone who has been in a dark place so long that more light feels wrong and right at the same time. She looked at Vera. She looked at Marat. She looked at the lights. Vera called out to her in the same language she had used in the terminus room. The woman said something back. Other doors were opening. Faces were appearing. Old faces and young ones. The faces of people who had been born here and had never seen the colony's power grids running at full allocation and had grown up learning to do everything in the cold with whatever dim light could be spared. Marat sat on a junction bench and let his suit's medical system do what it could with his chest wound. He watched the light increase by increments. His team was gone. Polina, Yusupov, Oksana, Fyodor, Tomoko. He would write their names in his report, all of them, at the top, before anything else. He would make sure their families knew what they had done and why. He thought about Fyodor crying quietly in the dark because he missed his daughter. He thought about Tomoko and the word run. He thought about the dog on the wall, good boy in 3 languages, painted by someone who needed to put a mark on the universe that said I was here, I loved something, I found it worth the effort. Vera sat down beside him again. She was humming again without seeming to notice it, the same work song as before, the tune that didn't need words. "What is that?" he asked. She thought about it. "My grandmother used to sing it when she was fixing something. I don't know the name. She learned it from her mother. The words are in a language none of us speak anymore." A pause. She said, "It was for when you were doing something difficult, and you needed to remind your hands what they knew." Marat listened to it. The lights kept increasing. Somewhere in the station's deep infrastructure, the last of the axis's resonant pattern was unwinding. 83 years of locked geometric precision releasing into the physics of an ordinary quadrant, where heat moved the way heat was supposed to move, where energy went where it was needed, where 300,000 people were going to wake up in the next 2 days and find their world incrementally, undramatically, but permanently warmer. He had not expected to survive this. He had thought, when he agreed to come, that the mathematics were good but the odds were not, and that the best likely outcome was that the chip got home somehow, even if he didn't. He was a scientist. He dealt in probabilities. The probability that one person with a data chip and an emitter, and a woman who knew the station's darkness and a capacity for not stopping when the math said he should. The probability of that, against 83 years and a Veth installation and 20 walkers, and a weapon that had operated without interruption since before he was born. He sat on the bench and breathed carefully around the pain in his chest. The woman from the doorway had come out fully now, and she was talking to Vera, and her hands were moving in emphatic gestures. And twice she put both hands flat against the wall, as though she was testing whether the surface was warmer. It wasn't, not yet. It would take time. That was fine. The people here knew how to wait. They had been waiting for 83 years. A few more days was nothing. More doors opening, more people. A child appeared from somewhere, maybe 7 years old, and stood in the corridor with wide eyes looking at the lights, and then looked at Marat, and Marat raised one hand in a small wave. The child raised a hand back, gravely carefully, as though the gesture mattered. It did. 40 hours later, the station's communication array, running now at full capacity for the first time in decades, transmitted a signal on the colonial emergency frequency. It was received by 4 separate monitoring stations in the outer system and relayed to the colonial authority within 6 minutes. The signal contained a 14-second voice message and then approximately 40 gigabytes of technical data. The voice message was from Marat Khavorov. He sounded tired, and his voice had the careful quality of someone managing significant pain. He identified himself, identified the station, stated the date and time. Then he said, "The axis is down. The null axis terminus at Station Perova has been disrupted, and the interference pattern has been broken. The effect should propagate fully within the next 36 hours. The Kolodny quadrant will return to standard energy parameters. I am alive. I am requesting extraction. The station population is alive and requesting evacuation and medical assistance. Please respond." The technical data contained the full mathematical analysis, the emitter specifications, the calibration sequence, the interference pattern mapping, and 8 years of prior calculation. Subsequent review by xenophysics teams at 5 different institutions would confirm that the mathematics were correct. They would also confirm that the solution was, while rigorous, unorthodox, based on an approach that no one else had tried because no one else had thought it was possible. The word the third reviewer used in her analysis was stubborn. As in, the solution works by exploiting a stubborn asymmetry in the axis's geometric anchor point. She used the word technically. She was not wrong. The extraction ship arrived on day 4. It came in on the outer docking ring, and Marat watched it from a viewport. The first time he had looked out at open space since coming aboard, and the sight of it still hit him in the old way. Vast and silent and indifferent and full of the possibility that humans had been insisting on for 300 years, despite everything the universe had done to suggest they should be more reasonable about their expectations. He had spent the 4 days cataloging the station's surviving population, their medical status, their needs, the walkers, the converted, the ones who had been through the terminus and were now moving through their own deconversion, slowly, unevenly, with the difficulty of people reassembling themselves from whatever had been left of them underneath. Some of them would be all right. Some of them were going to need a great deal of time. The man with the bad knee, Vera's cousin, whose name was Semyon, which Marat had learned on day 2, had sat in the corner of a habitation compartment for 36 hours before he said anything. The first thing he said was his daughter's name. That was in the report, too. Marat stood at the viewport and watched the extraction ship extend its docking arm. Vera came up beside him. She was carrying 2 cups of something hot, actual hot, the station's heating systems now running without restriction, which still seemed to surprise people. The warmth of it like a rumor that had turned out to be true. She handed him one. He took it. "Where will you go?" he asked. "Wherever they put us first," she said. "Then I don't know." She considered it. "I've never been anywhere but here. My grandmother's grandmother was born on this station. I know every room it has." A pause. Maybe it's time to find out what other rooms there are. Marat thought about the Kolodny colonies, the ones he had grown up in, the low-light apartments, and the layered clothing, and the particular discipline of warmth, the way you learn to conserve it, to share it, to treat it as something you made together, because on your own it wasn't enough. He thought about what it was going to feel like for 300,000 people to have more of it than they had planned for. The strange abundance of a thing you had learned to live without. He thought about 8 years of mathematics and 1 cracked data chip and a woman who hummed her grandmother's songs while she worked in the dark. The docking arm locked. "The report will take a month to write," he said. "There are 5 people's names at the top of it. When it comes out, they'll be in every citation." He paused. It seemed important to say that. Vera looked at him. Then she looked at the extraction ship. Then she looked at her cup. "Your grandmother," she said. Not quite a question. "My grandmother was from the Kolodny first settlement," he said. "She made a song too, not to fix things. She made it to get through the dark parts of a day." He stopped. "I can't remember the tune anymore. I've been trying for 4 days and I can't get it back." Vera was quiet for a moment. Then softly she hummed something, not the work song this time. Something different, a different shape, a different tempo, patient and low, the kind that doesn't need words. He didn't recognize it. It didn't matter. The docking arm pressurized, and the airlock opened, and the first of the extraction crew came through in their bright orange suit liners, bringing the smell of a different part of the universe with them. People began to move toward the airlock, the station's survivors, Semyon moving among them with his left-leaning walk, a child who kept stopping to touch the warm walls in wonder, an old man Marat had met on day 2 who had been born here and had never stopped keeping a detailed handwritten log of the station's temperature readings. Every single day for 60 years, because he had told himself someone would need the data eventually, and he had been right. The light in the ring was good now. Not warm yet, not fully, but on its way. Marat held his cup and drank the hot thing in it and stood in the good light and didn't stop.